Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninja speaking. For today's episode, we're going to be looking at the Whis Goku figure, as well as its accompanying head sculpt set brought to us by Kong Studio. For those wondering what's going on here, basically this is an unofficial third-party take of Goku's look from the Resurrection of F film. However, this one, unlike the official figure that came out quite some time back and is a bit dated, is using all of the 2.0 articulation points, the action body stuff, that is now readily available. For those that might remember, we have actually reviewed the custom Vegeta figure also by Kong Studios in the recent past, and unfortunately that one left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth due to a number of quality control issues which rendered my particular figure rather immobile in a lot of different aspects. So I'm really hoping they did manage to take some time to put some of the quality control issues to rest here, and we have something a little more stable this time around. But of course, the only way to find it out is to get it out of the packaging completely. So let's do just that. Starting off with a bit of a quick height measurement, Goku himself is going to be standing at a little under 6.5 inches, which keeps him mostly in scale with the rest of the line, although he is going to be slightly taller than most standard Gokus, just to point that out. It's worth noting as I get this thing out of the box that, honestly, most of the figure is using reused parts that have been recasted from other more official figures, with the exception of the hair, of course, which has been modified to add a little more detailing and some extra tufts that are present. Everything else can be sourced to original figure. As for the hair, however, while it does add a lot more detailing and some tufts that aren't actually part of most original sculpts, it technically is still not accurate to the Resurrection of F sculpt, which is also shown on the front of the box. It's missing a few hair tufts and spikes, which would have been present otherwise. As we're moving on to articulation with the figure, it's worth noting that while the figure does technically have everything that you would expect out of a proper 2.0 figure, the actual fitting of these joints is still a bit problematic at this time. Namely, the upper body, as you can see, was very shaky and frankly wobbly as I was moving things around, but at least in this case I could say that the butterfly joints were quite functional. That being said, for things that do see a lot of movement like those butterfly joints, I am almost noting immediately that there's scratchiness on the plastic, which is the exact same issue I saw on the Vegeta figure for things like the hip joints and what I can kind of see out of other various joints around the arms. In terms of shoulders and elbows, they're entirely functional, if a bit stiff if anything. And same with the wrist joints, although the wrist movement itself is a bit stunted due to the fact that the actual wristbands on the figure do limit their motion. They work, it's just you're not going to be able to get a full range that you might be expecting of a more standard Goku figure, just to put that out there. As for the waist and hips there, they are functional, although it's worth noting for the hip articulation, namely the leg spread here, it is being hindered by that skirt there, as the skirt itself is made out of an oddly hard plastic rather than a softer plastic you might be expecting. And as we're taking a look at the hips there, yep, unfortunately there's the same kind of worn plastic markings you could see that I had on the butterfly joints, so that does seem to be a common reoccurring issue at this time. Knee joints were incredibly snug, nice strong fit on there. Ankle joints, not so much. You are able to get some movement out of there, although the ankles in both of my cases do love to pop off all the time when you're trying to move them around. Toe joints themselves, you can see, they honestly do work just fine, although it's interesting that the bottom of the shoes are incredibly smooth. So yeah, you might have some kind of friction issues, or lack thereof, when you're trying to get this figure to pose around, just to put that out there. At least I can say this figure is definitely more functional than the Vegeta, so you are able to get quite a lot of unique poses on there, although the actual upper body definitely could have used some work, I'm afraid. To help put this toy into a little more context, we're going to be including the movie Broly Goku here, which as you can kind of see, yeah, the third-party Goku here borrows a lot of stuff from this particular toy. Mind you, things don't match up quite perfectly. Obviously, the upper body is referring to a different figure we're going to talk about in a second, and proportionally wise, there's a bit of an odd fit, especially the upper torso is a bit shrunk, and neck is fitting a bit shorter than it should be, which is probably the only reason these figures line up, because leg-wise, Goku stands taller. The legs are just slightly tall enough that it does make a bit of a difference, and if the upper bodies were the same length, then it would definitely stand taller overall. As for the upper body I was mentioning earlier, it is absolutely a Goku black top. Only the shirt is not painted in, so it's bare-chested. Moving on to accessories, it's worth noting that as you're swapping the heads, by the way, you want to be careful with how much force you put on there, because the paint will scratch on this thing. Unfortunately, you can kind of see it from the top there. However, it's kind of your standard Goku ball peg for the neck there, and that means that you can pretty much use any Goku head you want on there, including what is the included base Goku head that they have with the figure, with this winking eye expression, which, as you might guess from how familiar it looks, it is absolutely the Saiyan Rays on Earth head, only recasted for this particular thing. How easy does it go on? No effort really whatsoever. I didn't have to put too much force on it, and the faces plug back into it no problem, same with the bangs. Honestly, if it weren't for the fact that the thing is a bit soft in terms of sculpt, there's no issues on this thing whatsoever. It actually looks quite nice. A small added benefit, because this is absolutely the Saiyan Rays on Earth head sculpt, including the base of the hair, you can actually use the figure's faces from that particular release on this toy as well. That being said, as you can kind of see, the skin tone will not quite match up there because the original figure is a little more jaundiced, so to speak, as opposed to the more ruddy skin color used on this particular third party. Moving on to the hands, honestly, there's not too much really to add on here. They're your standard Goku hands, with the only thing I can add on there that, unfortunately, the actual casting is a bit on the soft side, much like the rest of the figure, and they have some casting flash that didn't get cleaned off, so you might have to do some touch-ups in order to get all that little scraping extra garbage off there from when they were casted. In terms of actual fit, however, they go on and off the wrist pegs very easily. They pop on very cleanly, pop off very cleanly, no complaints, no real risk of any wrist danger. And I'm just going to add this on here while I do the bit of a balancing test. The figure also does come with an alternate belt, which I do have in this footage here, which is a more of a billowy looking belt as opposed to the more narrow one that is included on the figure itself. It's mostly just an aesthetic thing. It also pops on and off without any real issue. It's just a nice thing to have. And you also can kind of see, when you get it working, the figure balances very nicely. Moving on to the various hair sculpts, you actually get two different sets of hair with this particular wrist, being the Super Saiyan Yellow as well as the Super Saiyan Rose look, and a few faces that are meant to go with the yellow. We're only going to really look at the yellow in this case because the rose hair is actually quite flat looking, despite using the same sculpt. And that's because, honestly, the Super Saiyan hair is the better of the two. It actually has more highlights in terms of the shading, as well as more orange shading in general that adds a little more depth. It's actually the much more interesting of the pair. That being said, it does suffer from the same kind of fitting issues I had with the original Super Saiyan blue hair that was on the figure, namely that the bangs just don't want to lock in place, which makes the faces not lock in place particularly well. Oh, speaking of faces, they're honestly very serviceable through the figure, but they're not exactly great in that they have the same kind of soft casting issues that are prevalent throughout the rest of the figures, and, well, certain things like the painting for the teeth and such aren't exactly the greatest. It works, but I don't like it. I'm sorry. Needs more work there. I must admit that after the Vegeta figure, I wasn't expecting too much here. And while this figure does still have its flaws, it's fairly serviceable if I'm being totally frank. That being said, if Kong Studios was ever able to get the whole issue with both the finish of the figure as well as all those nagging quality control issues out of the way, they'd be honestly sending us some bang-on figures at this point. Hopefully they do get that sorted out. For now, thanks for watching. Catch you all later.